In the news tonight, Jordanian military officials affirmed that until this minute, they have not received any proof of life or affirmations on the safety of Air Force pilot Muad al-Kasasbe and urged all Jordanians to remain united behind the Jordanian leadership and the armed forces. The Egyptian president cut short a visit to Ethiopia after the killing of at least 30 soldiers and police officers in the Sinai Peninsula in one of the bloodiest attacks carried out by a group affiliated with Daesh. And Israel announced tenders to build hundreds of new settler homes in the occupied West Bank in a plan denounced by Palestinian officials as a war crime and criticized by the United States. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. A senior military official has affirmed that Jordan still awaits proof that Jordanian Air Force pilot Muad al-Kasasbe, held by Daesh, is alive and urged all Jordanians to remain united behind the Jordanian leadership and the armed forces. Jordan Armed Forces spokesman Colonel Mamdouh al-Amiri stated that until this minute, Jordan has not received any proof of life or affirmations on the safety of al-Kasasbe. Al-Amiri added that the state, with all its competent agencies, continues to follow up around the clock on the case of Kasasbe, noting that in the event of any development, an update of the situation will be conveyed to the public in due time. He said the Jordan Armed Forces highly appreciates the level of awareness Jordanians must have at this time and is confident that the public will not be swayed by rumors and will be cautious as to derive their information only from official sources and abstain from spreading or publishing any misleading news on the case. Jordan today celebrates His Majesty King Abdullah's 53rd birthday. On January 24, 1999, a royal decree was issued naming him Crown Prince. Since his accession to the throne in February 1999, King Abdullah has focused on enhancing the capabilities of Jordanians, entrenching the concept of respect and the dignity of citizens, ensuring the sovereignty of the law, realizing equality, justice, and equal opportunities for all. In addition, he focused on pushing the development process forward and highlighting the effective role of Jordan in the international arena. Under His Majesty's rule, the kingdom took the initiative to implement political and economic reforms, including constitutional amendments and a new elections law, under which the latest parliamentary elections were held, triggering the parliamentary government experience that is expected to mature over the coming parliamentary cycles. On the occasion, King Abdullah received cables of good wishes from senior civic and military officials. Jordan has condemned the terrorist bombings that claimed the lives and injured dozens of soldiers and security forces in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Minister of State of Media Affairs and Communications, government spokesperson Mohammed al-Momani, affirmed Jordan's support to Egypt in all circumstances and to its efforts in fighting terrorism that targets the security, stability and safety of its people and army. Momani expressed Jordan's condolences to the Egyptian government and families of the victims and wished the injured a speedy recovery. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi cut short a visit to Ethiopia for an African Union summit following the killing of at least 30 soldiers and police officers in the Sinai Peninsula. The 4 separate attacks on security forces in North Sinai last night were among the bloodiest in years, which Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, a group affiliated with Daesh, claimed responsibility for. In the first attack, a military headquarters base and hotel in Al Arish, 25 people were killed and more than 50 injured, including civilians. Later, an army major was killed and 6 soldiers injured at a checkpoint in Rafah, while an assault on a checkpoint south of Al Arish wounded 4 soldiers. 3 military planes left Al Arish for Cairo today, carrying the bodies, including the bodies of 2 children who died today of wounds sustained. At least 5 men remained in critical condition, and the death toll was likely to rise. Israel published tenders today for the construction of 450 new housing units in occupied Palestinian territory, a move critics denounce as a political gesture ahead of a March general election. The tenders envisage construction in a number of locations, including near the West Bank city of Hebron. In addition, authorities have submitted plans for the construction of 93 homes in the East Jerusalem settlement of Gilo. A spokesman for Israel's housing ministry said the government was simply remarketing tenders that had failed to sell when they were initially offered last year. Israel goes to the polls on March 17 with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seeking a fourth term in office. Anti-settlement watchdog Peace Now called the wave of bids as a pre-election grab to establish facts on the ground and said it risks worsening relations between Israel and the United States ahead of a planned speech to Congress by Netanyahu. The United States expressed its deep concern over Israel's decision to expand settlements.
Our position is that we believe that settlements are illegitimate and counterproductive to achieving a two-state outcome. We have deep concerns about these highly contentious settlement construction announcements. They will have detrimental impacts on the ground, inflame already heightened tensions with the Palestinians, and further isolate the Israelis internationally. You know, the United States, as a close ally of Israel, works, uses our diplomatic influence around the globe to try to build support for Israel. And an announcement like this only serves to further isolate them. I can tell you that issuing tenders like this does nothing to bolster Israel's security. It does not increase its prosperity, and it does not further the cause for peace. In fact, it does precisely the opposite. It's unclear to me exactly what their motive is. But what is clear is that this, in our view, would only undermine the ability of the Israelis to build support internationally and to ultimately secure the kind of peace agreement with a two-state outcome that we believe is clearly in the best interest of Israel's national security.
Daesh terrorists launched a large-scale attack on the northern Iraqi province of Kirkuk, launching mortars and attacking positions of Kurdish fighters in 4 districts. A Peshmerga officer said his forces had recaptured the district of Maryam Bek, but said clashes were ongoing in Tall al-Ward, Maktab Khalid and Mullah Abdullah. A senior Kurdish official said 45 terrorists and 7 Kurdish fighters, including a senior commander brigadier, were killed. More than 750 Peshmerga fighters were killed in combat since Daesh overran their defenses in northern Iraq last summer, prompting U.S.-led airstrikes. And meanwhile, the U.S.-led coalition launched 6 airstrikes against Daesh terrorists in Syria and Iraq over the past 24 hours. In a statement, the combined joint task force said strikes hit the Syrian border town of Kobani, as well as Al-Assad and Tal Afar in Iraq. The statement added that the coalition struck several fighting positions and destroyed a building used by the militant group, as well as a bunker, among other targets. Leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, said the group does not want a war with Israel, but is ready for one and has the right to respond to Israeli aggression. Nasrallah was speaking at an event in Beirut commemorating the deaths of 6 Hezbollah fighters and an Iranian general killed by an Israeli airstrike in Syria on the 18th. Addressing the crowd via video link, Nasrallah said his group no longer had rules of engagement in the conflict with Israel and would hold it responsible for the assassination of any Hezbollah leaders or fighters. 2 days ago, Hezbollah retaliated to the killing of its fighters with a rocket attack that killed 2 Israeli soldiers on the frontier with Lebanon. Israel responded by launching an artillery and air barrage that killed a Spanish peacekeeper. Yemenis protested on the streets of Sana'a as residents in the capital grew weary of the Houthi presence and resulting political chaos. Many Sana'a residents have complained as fighters have set up checkpoints, taken over government ministries, and painted their slogans on mosques and the walls around the old city. Provinces across the rest of the country have said they will no longer take military commands from Sana'a after Houthis besieged the home and palace of President Abd Rabbo Mansour Hadi. Meanwhile, the political vacuum showed no signs of easing as Parliament indefinitely postponed its session to approve or reject Hadi's resignation. Health officials in the U.S. are struggling to deal with the worst outbreak of measles in 2 decades. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention urged Americans to get vaccinated for measles amid an outbreak that began at Disneyland in California in December, saying that 2014 saw the highest number of cases in 2 decades. So far, more than 90 people have been diagnosed with measles in California and elsewhere, most of them linked to an outbreak that began when an infected person from outside the U.S. visited Disneyland. Measles was declared eliminated in the U.S. in 2000, and the outbreak has renewed debate over the so-called anti-vaccination movement, in which fears about potential side effects of vaccines fueled by now debunked theories suggesting a link to autism have led a small minority of parents to refuse to allow their children to be inoculated. The sometimes deadly virus, which is airborne, can spread swiftly among unvaccinated children.
Should be educated and understand when they don't have their children vaccinated, it doesn't just affect their child, it affects many other children.
Electric guitar fanatics step forward. The original model of the Gibson Les Paul guitar is headed for auction. Known as Black Beauty, the solid body guitar is due to be sold at Auction House Guernsey's in New York on February 19. The 1954 priceless instrument belonged to iconic musician and inventor Les Paul for over 20 years before he gifted it to friend and fellow instrument maker Tom Doyle in 1976. While the instrument doesn't carry rare or expensive features, the history behind it is what makes it special. It is considered to be one of the most significant electric guitars ever made. We begin with tennis and the Australian Open. Top seed Novak Djokovic of Serbia ended Swiss Stanislas Wawrinka's title defense with another 5-set clash to book a third final showdown with Briton Andy Murray. The grinding 7-6, 3-6, 6-4, 4-6, 6-love win was riven by tension until the final one-sided set. Both players had their chances. Fourth seed Wawrinka had a chance to break Djokovic in the opening game of the decider, but blasted a backhand long, and from there he promptly crumbled. Djokovic is bidding to become the first man in the professional era to win 5 titles at Melbourne Park when he faces Murray in the final on Sunday. Canadian Justine Dufour-Lapointe won the Women's Mogul World Cup event at Lake Placid in New York. She edged the event by 0.43 of a point over U.S. favorite Hannah Kearney, scoring 86.86. The win was a second in a row for Dufour-Lapointe, who now leads the Women's World Cup Moguls standings by 59 points over Kearney. Andy Nod, also of Canada, was third.
26.3.
Yes!
And Canadian Michael Kingsbury took the title in the men's event, his 4th win in a row. His final score of 90.54 beat Russia's Alexander Smyshlaevs into 2nd place, with Marc-Antoine Gagnon of Canada 3rd. Kingsbury now leads the men's moguls rankings by over 200 points.
Totally Quartet of the 23.68. Mikhail Kingsbury. Hey, sharing is caring. Thanks for bends the count. He says try a little.
And finally, for a quick look at the weather, it continues to be cold in most parts of the kingdom tonight with southerly moderate winds. As for tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected, creating moderate conditions across the country during the day, but remains cold at night. Winds will be southeasterly moderate. Further south, the Gulf of Aqaba can enjoy mild conditions with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Here now to look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Jordanian military officials affirmed that until this minute, they have not received any proof of life or affirmations on the safety of Air Force pilot Muad al-Kasasbe and urged all Jordanians to remain united behind the Jordanian leadership and the armed forces. The Egyptian president cut short a visit to Ethiopia after the killing of at least 30 soldiers and police officers in the Sinai Peninsula in one of the bloodiest attacks carried out by a group affiliated with Daesh. And Israel announced tenders to build hundreds of new settler homes in the occupied West Bank in a plan denounced by Palestinian officials as a war crime and criticized by the United States. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ali Tukhan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.